Welcome everyone to the Tier 3 Trustees Annual Report Update, the third in a series of videos for the new SORP 2026. I'm Kimberly Fowkes, a Senior Audit Manager at Crest & Reeves. I'm also a trustee of a number of charities. And with me today is Dan Firminger, an ESG Advisor and trustee and former auditor. We're having a discussion today to what the new SORP means for Tier 3 charities, those over 15 million income. And clearly, Tier 1 and Tier 2 have already set the baseline for charities and what those changes mean for them. And Tier 3 charities need to adopt both of those as well as what we're going to talk about today. So it's going to include the additional disclosures around financial review, impact reporting, sustainability, which is why I've got Dan along with me today, and achievements and performance. So as a reminder to all of you, this new SORP uses some very clear and deliberate language. Must for those mandatory requirements, should for best practice, and may for those optional disclosures. So for these Tier 3 charities in particular, it's really shifted to the must, which increases that level of expectation for all of you about what users of the accounts need to see.
Thank you for that, Kimberly.
That's okay.
So, diving into the first key change for Tier 3 charities, what additional disclosures are required around achievements and performance?
Okay, so achievements and performance, the material fundraising activities need to be reported against objectives. And if material expenditure was incurred in the year to raise income, it must explain the effect of that expenditure, the effect it has had, and intended to have. So really reporting those outcomes and the return on that fundraising activity.
Right. So obviously some people will be thinking that's the kind of theory behind it and that's what the standard says, but putting it into practice, could you perhaps give an example of how a charity might apply those new rules?
Yeah, sure. So I think, charities have been really good about reporting on their activities and achievements before, but not necessarily stripping it down to material fundraising practices. So if you've got a, say, care charity that is raising money to fit out a whole new wing or something of their care home, or an independent school that is raising money and doing a particular targeted donation and fundraising event for a 3G pitch, it needs to talk about that in detail, that material fundraising stream. Is everything they intended to do happened, and has that expenditure had the impact that it was meant to have?
Okay, thank you. And building on that, the financial review section, what are the key enhancements to that, particularly, I guess, around going concern and financial risks, but how can trustees strike the balance between being open about uncertainty and not undermining confidence?
So it's a must now to explain any factors that are likely to affect the financial performance or position going forward. So before, charities may have maybe hidden away and shied away from being completely transparent. If reserves were low, for example, and pressure existed, trustees might not have wanted to highlight that too much. Although, I have actually seen charities that have been transparent and open about that having a better impact on their income. And actually more funders and donors have donated to them because they've seen that struggle. But really that must in the SORP is explaining why those reserves are low and what pressures exist, but why those trustees still consider that the charities are going concern, what uncertainty exists, what mitigations they have put in place to make things better within the charity, and those Tier 3 charities really needing to look forward and more forward than potentially those 12 months that some of them look after the balance sheet date for going concern. It's really, looking a lot more strategically and a lot more forward and explaining that in your trustees report.
Okay, and also using this as a positive opportunity, because you mentioned the fact that in the past we've seen charities that have spoken about some of their struggles and articulated that in a way that makes the charity shows the fact that the charity still needs to continue to exist for all these positive reasons. So I guess it's really using that as a positive opportunity rather than it being a pessimistic view.
Exactly. Be fair, be balanced, tell the whole story, sell the charity, but be honest and transparent as well.
Yeah. Perfect. Moving into something that's perhaps a bit newer, but not too unfamiliar to charities. What does the SORP now require in terms of impact reporting for Tier 3 charities?
Okay, so they must provide a more detailed evidence-based report. So outcomes for beneficiaries, wider societal impact, for example, longer-term effects, really enhancing that impact reporting section, beneficiary stories, case studies, for an example. Many charities are using qualitative measures, but really putting quantitative measures in there, KPIs, and charities over 15 million, they are probably tracking this stuff for their own management purposes and their own internal purposes and their strategic reporting and their impact reporting and view, but it's putting it in that trustee report as well and showing that understandable, fair, balanced argument and information, which is crucially relevant to their stakeholders. So trustees and management really understanding who your stakeholders are first, and then commenting in this way in your impact reporting for them. So whether that's your funders, your beneficiaries, your regulators, and evidence, report.
Which is a bit different to what we've perhaps seen in the past. Some charities are already doing that, but typically we see talking about this is what we did, but not talking about the impact that that's had. So we're seeing a real shift in the narrative towards the gap in society that the charity is aiming to address, and then building those evidence and the facts around that. Yeah,
so it's not what we did, it's what changed and how do we know it changed.
Yeah, I think this also links back to a governance point. It's really important here that the board and management have really worked on their theory of change, I suppose, and knowing why they exist and what their priorities are, because they need to sell that story. I mean, it's essentially their strategy, but if it hasn't been done, I guess we strongly encourage charities to really sit down and spend some time thinking about what's the specific gap in society we're filling. How do we sell that? Because it's a huge opportunity for charities to sell themselves to donors.
So I think a good impact report will show a good linkage between objectives and activities, and the most effective reports that we've seen combine both the things we've been talking about, so personal stories and beneficiary stories, and really they can show the emotion and the care behind their charity and their story, but then also included is that data which is backing everything up. So it's proving the good outcomes and the use of their activities with that data and with that KPI. So building on the impact reporting section, we are also seeing the introduction of the sustainability section. So it's a must now to include a dedicated sustainability section in the Tier 3 charities trustee report, and it must provide a summary of how the charity is responding to and managing environmental, governance and social matters. So sustainability means different things to different people and different charities. So Dan, could you just frame for us what the SORP is asking?
Yeah, sure. So obviously the SORP makes those very clear statements of what must be included by Tier 3s. It then lists some examples of what it means. So it says for environmental matters, charities can talk about how they manage climate risk and opportunities, any KPIs that they may be using, and including how they're calculated. For the social and governance aspects, they're listing some examples of, they're generally things that most charities might or should have in place already anyway, by the way, but it's things like how policies are managed, which most charities will be on top of. It's your governance processes, it's your cyber and security procedures, it's any procurement policies that you might have in place about how you do business with suppliers. It could be business ethics rules that are in place. And then looking a bit more, I suppose, internally at the impact that you're having on your own people, how the charity is ensuring good employee engagement and well-being, diversity and inclusion measures. You would probably also look to reference your gender pay gap reporting if that's applicable to you at that point. Also know some charities are doing that voluntarily, so it would be a good place to put that. That's obviously quite broad.
So how do you see it working in practice? What examples and requirements maybe in practice?
Yeah, so they've deliberately made the requirements broad and deliberately principles based. And that's designed in a way that's meant to be flexible for different types of charities, because every charity is going to be different, and they feel it's wrong to enforce set rules on charities and what's materially important to them. But that does create the risk of inconsistency and lack of clarity around what people are actually required to do. It equally creates a real opportunity for charities to tell a meaningful and authentic story, as there's no single perfect ESG report. While I can see it developing over time and an established best practice emerging, or even being determined by Charity Commission, it ultimately comes down to
from them in the Charity Commission, they might do the example accounts and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. But ultimately, I can't see that at this stage being much beyond what it already says in the SORP, which is quite vague. So it ultimately comes down to what's of material importance to the charity, the impact it has, and what stakeholders are asking for.
So in the absence of some of that information already, where would a charity start if they're new to this requirement of sustainability in Tier 3?
Start really simple and identify what you're already doing that could either be included under those E, S or G brackets, so environmental, social or governance brackets, and just make a basic list of what you think could be included under those headings. Then consider what's the most material ESG risk and opportunity to the charity, and that will depend on the charity. So a couple of examples of what you would consider: if you're an environmental charity, then clearly there's likely an expectation from the public or suppliers or funders, whoever it may be, that the policies you have in place are leaning towards you minimising your environmental impact as far as possible. So whether that's you prioritise public transport over combustion car or plane travel and stuff like that. But on the other hand, if you're a largely volunteer-based organisation and actually most of your environmental impact may occur through volunteers, then maybe you need to talk about how you monitor and guide their activity more rather than the environmental impact that you directly are having. Just consider your stakeholders from the outset. So we're increasingly seeing some major funders specifically stating grant agreements that they're expecting an update on matters that we would deem to be ESG matters. So the environmental impact that you may be having, your energy usage and things like that. Just really understand from your funders what they're going to be looking for, because this could be an opportunity to save time.
So really, it's about that increased transparency, and there is now a stronger linkage between all of the reporting in the trustee report, and that shift really from compliance-led reporting to meaningful stakeholder-focused communication. And talking about your beneficiaries, funders, donors, understanding them and making that fair and balanced, understandable report for them. So in summary, you've got your mandatory must sustainability and ESG disclosures, which are more comprehensive in the narrative, policies, risks, and the progress that's been made on them. There's that more detailed and evidence-based impact reporting, which is really shared with all of the tiers now, but particularly important in Tier 3. Expanded volunteer metrics and data, but that's also in Tier 2. And mandatory legacy income disclosures as well, also shared with Tier 2. If any of you would like to discuss anything further from today, here are our contact details, or alternatively contact your usual Crest & Reeves advisor. And remember, there are Tier 1 and Tier 2 videos if you are in that bracket for your charity. Thank you.